You have read that Muad'Dib had no playmates his own age on Caladan. The dangers were too great. But Muad'Dib did have wonderful companion teachers. There was Gurney Halleck, the troubadour warrior. You'll sing some of Gurney's songs as you read along in this book. There was Thufir Hiwat, the old Mentat master of assassins, who struck fear even into the heart of the Pasha Emperor. There were Duncan Idaho, the sword master of the Gainas, Dr. Wellington Yue, a name black in treachery but bright in knowledge, the Lady Jessica, who guided her son in the Bene Gesserit way, and of course, the Duke Leto, whose qualities as a father have long been overlooked from A Child's History of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. Thufir Hiwat slipped into the training room of Castle Caladan and closed the door softly. He stood there for a moment, feeling old and tired and storm-weathered. His left leg ached where it had been slashed once in the service of the old Duke. 3 generations of them now, he thought. He stared across the big room, bright with noon pouring through the skylights. Saw the boy seated with back to the door, intent on papers and charts spread across an L table. How many times must I tell that lad never to set himself with his back to the door? Halleck cleared his throat. Paul remained bent over his studies. A cloud shadow passed over the skylights. Again, Halleck cleared his throat. Paul straightened, spoke without turning. I know. I'm sitting with my back to the door. Howard suppressed a smile, strode across the room. Paul looked up at the grizzled old man who stopped at a corner of the table. Howard's eyes were 2 pools of alertness in a dark and deeply seamed face. I heard you coming down the hall, Paul said, and I heard you open the door. The sounds I make could be imitated. I'd know the difference. He might at that. Howard thought. That witch mother of his is giving him the deep training, certainly. I wonder what her precious school thinks of that. Maybe that's why they sent the old proctor here, to whip our dear Lady Jessica into line. Howard pulled up a chair across from Paul, sat down facing the door. He did it pointedly, leaned back and studied the room. It struck him as an odd place suddenly. It's a stranger place with most of its hardware already gone to Arrakis. A training table remained, and a fencing mirror with its crystal prisms glistened. The target dummy beside it, patched and padded, looking like an ancient foot soldier maimed and battered in the wars. There stand I, Howard thought. Thufir, what are you thinking? Paul asked. Howard looked at the boy.
I was thinking we'll be out of here soon, and likely never see this place again.
Does that make you sad?
Sad? Nonsense. Parting with friends is a sadness. A place is only a place.
He glanced at the charts on the table.
Arrakis is just another place.
Did my father send you to test me? Howard scowled. The boy had such observing ways about him. He nodded.
You're thinking it'd been nicer if he'd come up himself. But you must know how busy he is. He'll be along later.
I've been studying about the storms on Arrakis.
The storms, I see.
They sound pretty bad.
That's too cautious a word. Bad. The storms build up across 6,000 or 7,000 kilometers of flatlands. Feed on anything that can give them push. Uriel's force. Other storms. Anything that has an ounce of energy in it. They can blow up to 700 kilometers an hour. Blow everything loose that's in their way. Sand, dust, everything. They can eat flesh off bones and etch the bones to slivers.
Why don't they have weather control?
Arrakis has special problems. Costs are higher. And there'd be maintenance and the like.
The guild wants a dreadful high price for satellite control.
And your father's house isn't one of the big rich ones, lad. You know that.
Have you ever seen the Fremen?
The lad's mind is darting all over today,
Howard thought.
Like as not, I have seen them, he said. There's little to tell them from the folk of the Graben and Sink. They all wear those great flowing robes, and they stink to heaven in any closed space. It's from those suits they wear. They call them still suits that reclaim the body's own water.
Paul swallowed, suddenly aware of the moisture in his mouth, remembering a dream of thirst. That people could want so for water they had to recycle their body moisture struck him with a feeling of desolation. Water is precious there, he said. Howard nodded, thinking,
perhaps I'm doing it, getting across to him the importance of this planet as an enemy. It's madness to go in there without that caution in our minds.
Paul looked up at the skylight, aware that it had begun to rain. He saw the spreading wetness on the gray meadowgrass. Water, he said.
You'll learn a great concern for water, Howard said. As the Duke's son, you'll never want for it. But you'll see the pressures of thirst all around you.
Paul wet his lips with his tongue, thinking back to the day a week ago and the ordeal of the Reverend Mother. She too had said something about water starvation. You'll learn about the funeral plains, she'd said. About the wilderness that is empty. The wasteland where nothing lives except the spice and the sandworms. You'll stain your eye pits to reduce the sun glare. Shelter will mean a hollow out of the wind and hidden from view. You'll ride upon your own 2 feet without thopter or grand car or mount. And Paul had been caught more by her tone, sing-song and wavering, than by her words. When you live upon Arrakis, she said, Kala, the land is empty. The moons will be your friends, the sun will be your enemy. Paul had sensed his mother come up beside him, away from her post guarding the door. She had looked at the Reverend Mother and asked, Do you see no hope, Your Reverence? Not for the father. And the old woman waved Jessica to silence. Looked down at Paul. Grave this on your memory, lad. A world is supported by 4 things. She held up 4 big-knuckled fingers. The learning of the wise, the justice of the great, the prayers of righteous, and the valor of the brave. But all these things are nothing. She closed her fingers into a fist. Without a ruler who knows the art of ruling, make that the silence of your tradition. A week had passed since that day with the Reverend Mother. Her words were only now beginning to come into full register. Now sitting in the training room with Thufir Hiwat, Paul felt a sharp pang of fear. He looked across at the Mentat's puzzled frown. Where were you all going that time? Howard asked. Did you meet the Reverend Mother? That truth-sayer witch from the Imperium? Howard's eyes quickened with interest. I met her. Paul hesitated, found that he couldn't tell Howard about the ordeal. The inhibitions went deep. Yes? What did she? Paul took 2 deep breaths. She said a thing. He closed his eyes, calling up the words. And when he spoke, his voice unconsciously took on some of the old woman's tone. You, Paul Atreides, descendant of kings, son of a duke, you must learn to rule. It's something none of your ancestors learned. Paul opened his eyes again. That made me angry and said my father rules an entire planet. And she said, he's losing it. And I said my father was getting a richer planet. And she said, he'll lose that one too. And I wanted to run and warn my father, but she said I'd already been warned by you, by Mother, by many people.
True enough, Howat muttered. Then why are we going? Paul demanded. Because the Emperor ordered it. And because there is hope in spite of what that witch spy said. Well spotted from this ancient fountain of wisdom. Paul looked down at his right hand, clenched into a fist beneath the table. Slowly, he willed the muscles to relax. She put some kind of hold on me, he thought. How? She asked me to tell her what it is to rule, Paul said. And I said that one commands. She said I had some unlearning to do. She had Mark right there right enough. Howat thought. He nodded for Paul to continue. She said a ruler must learn to persuade and not to compel. She said he must lay the best coffee hearth to attract the finest men. How'd she figure her father attracted men like Duncan and Ernie? Howat asked. Paul shrugged. Then she said a good ruler has to learn his world's language. That it's different for every world, and I thought she meant they didn't speak Gaelic on Arrakis. But she said that wasn't it at all. She said she meant the language of the rocks and growing things. The language you don't hear just with your ears. And I said that's what Dr. Yu calls the mystery of life. Howat chuckled. How'd that sit with her? I think she got mad. She said that the mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. So I quoted the first law of Mentat at her. A process cannot be understood by stopping it. Understanding must move with the flow of the process, must join it and flow with it. That seemed to satisfy her. He seems to be getting over it, Howat thought. But that old witch frightened him. Why did she do it? Thufir, Paul said. Will Arrakis be as bad as she said? Nothing could be that bad, Howat said and forced a smile. Take those friends, for example. The renegade people of the desert. By first approximation analysis, I can tell you there are many, many more of them than the Imperium suspects. People live there, lad. A great many people, and Howat pulls a sinewy finger beside his eye. They hate Harkonnens with a bloody passion. You must not breathe a word of this, lad. I tell you only as your father's helper. My father had told me of Seleucus Secundus, Paul said. Do you know, Thufir, it sounds much like Arrakis, perhaps not quite as bad, but much like it. We don't really know of Seleucus Secundus today. Howat said. Only what it was like long ago. mostly, but what is known. You're right on that score. Will the Fremen help us? It's a possibility. Howard stood up. I leave today for Arrakis. Meanwhile, you take care of yourself for an old man who's fond of you, eh? Come round here like a good lad and sit facing the door. It's not that I think there's any danger in the castle. It's just a habit I want you to form. Paul got to his feet, moved around the table. You're going today? Today it is. And you'll be following tomorrow. Next time we meet, you'll be on the soil of your new world. He gripped Paul's right arm at the bicep. Keep your knife arm free, huh? And your shield at full charge. He released the arm, patted Paul's shoulder, whirled, and strode quickly to the door. Thufir, Paul called. Howard turned, standing in the open doorway. Don't sit with your back to any doors, Paul said. A grin spread across the seamed old face. That I won't, lad. Depend on it. And he was gone, shutting the door softly behind. Paul sat down where Howard had been, straightened the papers. One more day here, he thought. He looked around the room. We're leaving. The idea of departure was suddenly more real to him than it had ever been before. He recalled another thing the old woman had said about a world being the sum of many things. The people, the dirt, the growing things, the moons, the tides, the suns. The unknown sum called nature. A vague summation without any sense of the now. And he wondered, what is the now? The door across from Paul banged open, and an ugly lump of a man lurched through it, preceded by a handful of weapons. Well, Gurney Halleck, Paul called. Are you the new weapons master? Halleck kicked the door shut with one heel. You'd rather I'd come play games, I know. He said. He glanced around the room, knowing that Howard's men already had been over it, checking, making it safe for a Duke's heir. The cell code signs were all around. Paul watched the rolling, ugly man stand himself back in motion. Veer toward the training table with a load of weapons. Saw the 9-string bow set slung over Gurney's shoulder. With the multi-pick woven through the strings near the head of the fingerboard. Halleck dropped the weapons on the exercise table, lined them up, the rapiers, the bodkins, and the cudgels, the slow pellet stunners, the shield belts, the ink-vine scar along his jawline
writhed as he turned, casting a smile across the room. So you don't even have a good morning for me, you young pup. Halleck said. And what barb did you sink in the old wallet? He passed me in the hall like a man running to his enemy's funeral. Paul grinned. Of all his father's men, he liked Gurney Halleck best. Knew the man's moods and devilry, his humors, and thought of him more as a friend than as a hired sword. Halleck swung the basket off his shoulder, began tuning it. If you won't talk, you won't, he said. Paul stood, advanced across the room, calling out, Well, Gurney, do we come prepared for music when it's fighting time? So what's test for our elders today? Halleck said. He tried a chord on the instrument, nodded. Where's Duncan Idaho? Paul asked. Isn't he supposed to be teaching me weaponry? Duncan's gone to lead the second wave into Arrakis, Halleck said. All you have left is poor Gurney, who's fresh out of fight and spoiled for music. He struck another chord, listened to it, smiled. And it was decided in council that you being such a poor fighter, we'd best teach you the music trade so as you won't waste your life entire. Maybe you better sing me a lay then, Paul said. Want to be sure how not to do it. Ah! Gurney laughed and swung into Galatian girls. His multi-pick a blur over the strings as he sang, Oh, the Galatian girls, which do oppose, and they're keen for water. But if your desired aims like consuming flames, try a Cardenine daughter. Not bad for such a poor hand with a pick, Paul said. But if my mother heard you sing a body like that in the castle, she'd have your ears on the outer wall for decoration. Gurney pulled at his left ear. Poor decoration, too. They haven't been bruised so much listening to keyholes while a young lad I know practiced some strange days on his basset. So you've forgotten what it's like to find sand in your bed, Paul said. He pulled a shield belt from the table, buckled it faster on his waist. Then this fight. Halleck's eyes went wide in mock surprise. So it was your wicked hand that did the deed. Guard yourself today, young master. Guard yourself. He grabbed up a rapier, laced the air with it. I am a hell fiend out for revenge.
Paul lifted the companion rapier, bent in his hands, started nearly 1 foot forward. He let his manner go solemn in a comic imitation of Dr. Yui. What adult my father sends or weapons me for weaponry? Paul intoned. This doltish Gurney Halleck has forgotten the first lesson for a fighting man, armed and shielded. Paul snapped the force button at his waist, felt the crinkled skin tingling of the defensive shield at his forehead and down his back. Heard external sounds taking on a characteristic shield-filtered flatness. In shield fighting, one moves fast on defense, slow on attack, Paul said. Attack has the sole purpose of tricking the opponent into a misstep. Setting him up for the attack sinister. The shield turns the fast blow, admits the slow cudgel. Paul snapped up the rapier. Fanned fast and whipped it back for a slow thrust, timed to enter a shield's mindless defenses. Halleck watched the action, turned at the last minute to let the blunted blade pass his chest. Speed excellent, he said. But you were wide open for an underhanded counter with a slip tip. Paul stepped back, chagrined. I should whip your backside for such carelessness, Halleck said. He lifted a naked cudgel from the table and held it up. This in the hand of an enemy. Turn out your life's blood. You're not pupil, none better. But I've warned you that not even in play do you let a man inside your guard with death in his hand. I guess I'm not in the mood for it today, Paul said. Mood? Halleck's voice betrayed his outrage even through the shield's filtering. What has mood to do with it? You fight when it's necessary. When this necessity arises. No matter the mood. Mood's a thing for cattle, or making love, or playing the basset. It's not for fighting. I'm sorry, Gurney. You're not sorry enough. Halleck activated his own shield, crouched with cudgel upthrust in left hand. The rapier poised high in his right. Now I say, guard yourself for true. He leaped high to one side, then forward, pressing a furious attack. Paul fell back, parrying. He felt the field crackling as shield edges touched and repelled each other. Sensed the electric tingling of the contact along his skin. What's gotten into Gurney? He asked himself. He's not faking this. Paul moved his left hand, dropped his bodkin into his palm on its wrist sheath. You see you need for an extra blade, huh? Halleck grunted. Is this betrayal? Paul wondered. Surely not Gurney. Around the room they fought. Thrust and parry, feint and counterfeint. The air within their shield bubbles grew stale under the demands on it that the slow interchange along barrier edges could not replenish. With each new shield contact, the smell of the ozone grew stronger. Paul continued to back, but now he directed his retreat toward the exercise table. If I can lure him beside the table, I'll show him a trick. Paul thought. One more step, Gurney. Halleck took the step. Paul directed a parry downward, turned, saw Halleck's rapier catch against the table's edge. Paul flung himself aside, thrust with rapier, and came across Halleck's neckline with a bodkin. He stopped the blade an inch from the jugular. Is this what you seek? Paul whispered. Look down, lad. Gurney panted. Paul obeyed. Saw Halleck's Kindle thrust under the table's edge, the tip almost touching Paul's groin. We'd have joined each other in death, Halleck said. But I admit you fought some better when pressed to it. You seemed to get the mood. And he grinned wolfishly, the ink-vine scar rippling along his jaw. The way you came at me, Paul said. Would you really have drawn my blood? Halleck withdrew the cudgel, straightened. If you'd have fought one whit beneath your abilities, I'd have scratched you a good one. A scar you'd remember. I'll not have my favorite pupil fall to the first Harkonnen tramp who happens along. Paul deactivated his shield, leaning on the table to catch his breath. I deserved that, Gurney. But it would have angered my father if you'd hurt me. I'll not have you punished for my failing. As to that, Halleck said, it was my failing too. And you needn't worry about a training too. You're lucky you have so few. As to your father, the Duke could punish me only if I'd failed to make a first-class fighting man out of you. And I've been failing there. If I hadn't explained the fallacy in this mood thing you've suddenly dropped. Paul straightened, slipped his bodkin back into its wrist sheath. It's not exactly play we do here, Halleck said. Paul nodded. He felt a sense of wonder at the uncharacteristic seriousness in Halleck's manner, the sobering intensity. He looked at the beet-colored ink-vine scar on the man's jaw, remembering the story of how it had been put there by Beast Raban in a Harkonnen slave pit on Gigi Prime. and Paul felt a sudden shame that he had doubted Halleck even for an instant. It occurred to Paul then that the making of Halleck's scar had been accompanied by pain, a pain as intense perhaps as that inflicted by a Reverend Mother. He thrust his thought aside. It chilled their world. I guess it did help for some play today, Paul said. Things are so serious around here lately. Halleck turned away to hide his emotions, something burned in his eyes. There was pain in him, like a blister. All that was left of some lost yesterday that time had pruned off him. How soon this child must assume manhood, Halleck thought. How soon he must read that form within his mind, that contract of brutal caution, to enter the necessary act on the necessary line. Please list of your next of kin. Hawk spoke without turning. I sense the play in you, lad. And I'd like nothing better than to join in it. But this no longer can be play. Tomorrow we go to Arrakis. Arrakis is real. The Harkonnens are real. Paul touched his forehead with his rapier blade held vertical. Halleck turned, saw the salute, and acknowledged it with a nod. He gestured to the practice dummy. Now we work on your timing. Let me see you catch that thing sinister. I'll control it from over where I can have a full view of the action. And I warn you, I'll be trying new counters today. There is a warning you did not get from a real enemy. Paul stretched up on his toes to relieve his muscles. He felt solemn with the sudden realization that his life had become filled with swift changes. He crossed to the dummy, slapped the switch on its chest with his rapier tip, and felt the defensive field forcing his blade away. On guard, Halleck called, and the dummy pressed the attack. Paul activated his shield, parried and countered. Halleck watched as he manipulated the controls. His mind seemed to be in two parts. One alert to the needs of the training fight, and the other wandering in flybuzz. I am the well-trained fruit tree, he thought, full of well-trained feelings and abilities, and all of them grafted onto me. All begging for someone else to pick. For some reason, he recalled his younger sister, her elfin face so clear in his mind. But she was dead now, in a pleasure house for our Harkonnen troops. She had loved pansies, or was it daisies? He couldn't remember. It bothered him he couldn't remember. Paul countered a slow swing of the dummy. brought up his left hand and tracer. The clever little devil, Halleck thought, intent now on Paul's interwaving hand motions. He's been practicing and studying on his own. That's not Duncan's style. And it's certainly nothing I've taught him. This only added to Halleck's sadness. I'm infected by mood, he thought. And he began to wonder about Paul, if the boy ever listened earfully to his pillow while throbbing it in the night. If wishes were fishes, we'd all cast nets, he murmured. It was his mother's expression, and he always used it when he felt the blackness of tomorrow on him. And then he thought what an odd expression that was, to be taken to a planet that had never known seas or fishes.